2, 1.
Justice Anthony Kennedy steps down and the world goes insane. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Today's show is now in order. I'm not saying that I have inside information on who the president's going to pick or anything like that. I'm not saying anything like that. I'll give you all the updates on the news, and we'll go through what this means that Justice Anthony Kennedy, who, as I have said many times on this program, made up his mind on how to vote based on whether he had his Metamucil that morning, he's going to step down. I'll explain everything that means in just a second. First, I want to remind you that we have a special live stream this coming Monday, July 2nd, 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll be joined by special guest Jordan Peterson to celebrate Independence Day. God King Jeremy Boring will host a new edition of Daily Wire Backstage with me, Andrew Klavan, and Michael Knowles to look back on our country's birth and look ahead to its future with the world's most prominent Canadian. Subscribers will even be able to write in live questions for us to answer on the air. Again, that is Monday, July 2nd, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific with Jordan Peterson. You can find our special live stream on Facebook and YouTube, so don't miss it. And if you haven't heard this already, I will be taking the Ben Shapiro Show live to audiences in Dallas and Phoenix this August. You'll be able to see me in person and join in an audience Q&A. Tickets are going fast. Visit dailywire.com/events to get in those last ticket orders right now. dailywire.com/events to get your additional seats and info. Alrighty, so before we jump in, first let's talk about life insurance. Now, normally, if you're sitting on the Supreme Court, you stay there until you die. Anthony Kennedy, however, did not. But we all at some point will pass. And when we do, it will be a good idea for us to have had life insurance, because 71% of people say they need life insurance. The real answer is 100% of people. If you have family, if you have people who you'd like to benefit if you die, then Policy Genius is the place to go, because it's the easy way to compare life insurance online. You can compare quotes in just 5 minutes. When it is that easy, putting it off becomes a lot harder. You can compare quotes while sitting on the couch watching TV or while listening to this podcast. So go check it out, policygenius.com. They don't just make life insurance easy. They also compare disability insurance and renter's insurance and health insurance. If you care about it, they can cover it. So if you need life insurance, but you've been putting it off, check out Policy Genius. That's policygenius.com. There's no sales pressure. There's zero hassle, and it is free. Again, there's no reason for you not to have life insurance. The fact is that if something should happen to you and you leave your family without any sort of financial recourse, that is your own fault, and there's no excuse for it. Check out policygenius.com. When it's this easy to compare life insurance, no reason to put it off, policygenius.com. Okay, so yesterday, after we finished this podcast, Anthony Kennedy stepped down and blew up the world. So I was not expecting Justice Anthony Kennedy to step down from his position on the Supreme Court. And the fact is that I think most people were hit by a truck over this. Like, most people in the Trump administration were very surprised by this. And maybe President Trump was not, because maybe he'd be having discussions with Justice Kennedy. But there are a lot of people who are very surprised by Justice Kennedy stepping down, specifically because most of his legacy is going to be the gay rights stuff, right? He was the lead writer in Obergefell, which was the case that suggested that same-sex marriage had to be the law of the land. He was socially liberal on issues like abortion. But he stepped down while Trump was president and there was a Republican Congress. And that cut against a lot of the conventional wisdom. I, for example, thought that he was going to stick it out until there was a Democrat who was president so that his legacy would be maintained. Instead, he decided to step down. The reason I think he decided to step down, besides the fact that he's 81 years old, is because I think that he looked at the spate of rulings that the Supreme Court has issued over the last 3 weeks. And what he saw was that there were 4 votes to overturn a lot of First Amendment protections. And there have been 3 major cases in the last couple of weeks in which 5-4, the Supreme Court had decided in favor of free speech. But if he were to be replaced by somebody from the left, then the left would immediately curtail the right to free speech. So, for example, there was a case that I discussed at length yesterday on the podcast, this case in which the Supreme Court decided that you could not be forced to pay into a union for which you did not vote. And Anthony Kennedy was on the majority side of that opinion. He said that that was a violation of the First Amendment. Well, there were 4 votes to say that the government can force you to pay money to an association like a union that you don't want to pay into. Right? Anthony Kennedy probably looked at that and he said, I'm not sure that I want to leave when a Democrat's in office, because then there will be 5 votes in favor of the proposition that the government can force you to pay money to an association that you don't like. And then there was a case that came down in the last couple of weeks in which, for example, it said that the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, where it said that if you are a religious baker, you do not have to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding, but only, this was decided on narrow grounds, only because the regulation in question was badly promulgated by the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. There were 4 votes in that case to basically suggest that any religious baker in the country can be forced at point of government gun to cater a same-sex wedding. And Anthony Kennedy, even though he's a gay rights advocate, might not be the kind of guy who wants the government to force people to do what they don't want to do at point of gun. until he figured, okay, if I step down when a Democrat is president, then there will be 5 votes for the proposition that the government can force any religious person in the country to violate his or her prescriptions when it comes to business. So I think Anthony Kennedy looked at the radical left of the court and he said, I don't want my legacy to be the radical left of the court. I'd rather that my legacy be the gay rights legacy. My guess is that he went to Chief Justice Roberts and he got a guarantee from him that Roberts would become the new swing vote if same-sex marriage were to come back up for reconsideration, and Roberts will work to tamp that down. That the same-sex marriage stuff will stay enshrined in law, and his legacy will be enshrined, and he'll be fine. And he will be able to step down from the court and be replaced by somebody who is more in line with his thinking on First Amendment issues. Now, all of that is speculation, but that is my strong inclination, is that that's what happened here. In any case, the Kennedy steps down, and that, of course, opens up a slot on the Supreme Court and a swing vote on the Supreme Court, because Kennedy has been the swing vote. Kennedy has been the guy who makes the decisions in these 5-4 cases. He's been the most powerful guy in the country for a long time. And that is a testament to the fact that the Supreme Court has become far too powerful in American life. You saw an enormous amount of gnashing of teeth and wailing and rending of garments from the left and tremendous excitement from the right at the fact that this seat is now open on the Supreme Court and Trump is going to get to fill it. And the reason for that is that the Supreme Court has become entirely too powerful in the structure of American government. If you go back and you look at the Federalist Papers, and we go through them every week here on the Ben Shapiro Show, when you go back and you look through the Federalist Papers, what you see is that they thought that the judiciary was going to be a relatively powerless arm of the government, that its job was basically going to be to sit there and say this is constitutional and this is not, but not on the grounds that they don't like a piece of legislation. In fact, the federal constitution didn't even apply to the states. So the federal courts, and the Supreme Court in particular, were supposed to be relatively toothless. Now the Supreme Court gets to decide whether everyone in the country is able to obtain an abortion, is able to kill babies. The Supreme Court gets to decide whether anyone in the country is able to get married to anybody else. The Supreme Court has entirely too much power, and that is reflected in all of the focus on the Supreme Court. That's because the left has taken the Supreme Court and used it as a tool in order to promulgate its agenda. The left sees the Supreme Court as its chief tool in pushing legislation it can't get passed through popular means. The reality is the left was pushing same-sex marriage, for example, for years and years, and they weren't getting any place with regard to federal legislation. So they went to the courts, and the courts gave them what they wanted. And the same thing was true on abortion. Well, because you rely on the courts, when the courts flip to the other side, there's now a lot of power in the hands of the right. And we'll talk about what that means and what the courts should be doing in just one second. First, I want to point out that, some of us have been dreaming of being on the Supreme Court our entire lives. So, Mr. President, if you're listening to this, I would just remind you that when 12-year-old Ben Shapiro was playing at the Israeli Bonds banquet in 1996, Larry King talked specifically about the dreams of that young man.
Shapiro is 12 years old. He'll be accompanied by his father, David. He began training on the violin at age 5. In addition to the violin, he plays chess, loves baseball, completes in track and field. His goal is to become the first Orthodox rabbi to sit on the Supreme Court. Meaning of court will have to close at 3 o'clock on Friday.
So I'm not saying that it's something that I would take. I'm saying it's a job that if it were offered to me, I would take. I'm not saying that both Ann Coulter and David Limbaugh said in 2005, when I was still at Harvard Law School, I should be on the Supreme Court. I'm not saying that I'm 34 years old and I'd be on the Supreme Court for the next 60 years, Mr. President. But if you chose to make that pick, would I turn it down? I don't know. I mean, it's not like I don't know. I'm not that enthusiastic about it. I mean, but okay. In any case, Mitch McConnell says that the vote is going to come this fall. That this fall there will be a vote on President Trump's replacement justice, and you can just see the glee on Cocaine Mitch's face. So Mitch McConnell has snorted a full line, and then he went into Capitol Hill, and this is what Mitch McConnell sounds like when he's very, very excited about something.
The Senate stands ready to fulfill its constitutional role by offering advice and consent on President Trump's nominee to fill this vacancy. We will vote to confirm Justice Kennedy's successor this fall.
Okay, that is amped up Mitch McConnell right there. That is Mitch McConnell on an 11 on a skeleton. He's got that spinal tap. He got that spinal tap volume turned all the way to the top. And look, Mitch McConnell deserves a lot of credit for this because it was Mitch McConnell who said, I am not going to move forward on the nomination of Merrick Garland. And he stood strong in the face of a lot of press attacks. And it's Mitch McConnell who is largely responsible for the fact that there will be 2 picks for the President of the United States. President Trump says he is going to pick from the current list, which makes a lot of sense. He has a list of 25 possibilities. There are top 5 that I'm going to explain in just a few minutes here. I'm going to go through the people who are being looked at with the most scrutiny, according to Fred Barnes over at the Weekly Standard. We'll talk about how a justice should be selected. But here's President Trump saying that he's going to pick from the current list. Unfortunately, there are those of us who are not on the list. But President Trump says that he will pick from the list that he's got already.
Who will you pick to replace him, sir?
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Well, we have obviously numerous people. We have a list of 25 people that I actually had during my election. I had to 20, and as you know, I added 5 a little while ago.
And President Trump also said last night, he had a big rally last night, and he said that he was honored that Kennedy chose to step down on his watch.
And I'm very honored that he chose to do it during my term in office because he felt confident in me to make the right choice and carry on his great legacy. That's why he did it.
Okay, one of the things that's amazing about President Trump, you really have to admire, the man has the devil's luck. I mean, there's just no question that he has incredible luck. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't have skill. I mean, the president is very skilled at a good many things, but he's also damned lucky. I mean, the fact is that George W. Bush, in his entire 8-year term in office, got to replace 2 justices. President Obama, in his entire 8-year term in office, got to replace 2 justices, neither of them swing justices. President Trump gets to replace 2 justices in the first year and a half of his term. Right? That's an amazing, amazing thing. And one of those is Justice Kennedy, who's a swing justice. Now, President Trump was lucky enough to have Jeb Bush to beat up on in the primaries and then get $2 billion of free media coverage. He was lucky enough to run against the worst candidate in American history, who was under full FBI investigation. And a week before the election, it was revealed that she was under renewed FBI investigation. President Trump was lucky enough to be there when Kim Jong-un accidentally blew up his own nuclear mountain. And now he is lucky enough to be there when Justice Anthony Kennedy steps down. So, you know, Lefty Gomez, famous New York Yankees pitcher, once said, it's better to be lucky than good. It's better to be both lucky and good. President Trump is definitely lucky, and he certainly has the opportunity to be quite good here. Now, how should justices be selected? Right? How should we determine which justices should be selected? Because the fact is, Republicans have blown opportunity after opportunity on the Supreme Court. Right? I may be the only conservative in America who came out against the nomination of Judge Roberts for Chief Justice Roberts way back when. Way back in 2005, when Bush nominated Roberts, I opposed Roberts because I said the man did not have a long track record of textualism and originalism, and he wasn't on record supporting strong textualist positions when it came to controversial cases. And anybody who is not openly conservative, and I don't mean conservative in the sense that they're politically conservative, anybody who is not textualist or originalist, which I'll explain in just a second, those people tend to move to the center relatively quickly. And I'll explain why that matters in just a second. First, I want to talk a little bit about ZipRecruiter. So, your business needs to get better, right? You need to recruit a new justice to the Supreme Court. So where do you look? Well, you could rely on your friends. You could rely on people that you know to recommend somebody for a job, or you could actually canvass the entire country for the best candidates. And that's why you need ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter learns what you're looking for, identifies people with the right experience, and then invites them to apply to your job. 80% of employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. And ZipRecruiter doesn't stop there. They even spotlight the strongest applications you receive, so you never actually miss a great match. The right candidates are out there, and ZipRecruiter is how you find them. Businesses of all sizes trust ZipRecruiter for their hiring needs. It's why we use ZipRecruiter here at the Daily Wire. Right now, my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free. So go to ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. That's ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. You can try it out for free. ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. Again, there's a reason that we use it here at the office, and there's no reason for you to waste a lot of time sifting through a bunch of bad resumes when you could have ZipRecruiter basically do it for you. ZipRecruiter knew there was a smarter way. They built a platform that finds the right job candidates for you. Go check them out right now. ZipRecruiter.com/dailywire. They are the smartest way to hire. Again, ZipRecruiter.com. And when you use that /dailywire, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. Okay, so when it comes to selection of justices, here's what you need. You need an open and obvious commitment to originalism and textualism. Originalism and textualism are the basic notion that when you read a text, when you read the Constitution of the United States, you're not reading poetry. It is not a living document where you get to reinterpret the provisions as you see fit that day. That's not what the Constitution was for. And you wouldn't interpret any other piece of legislation that way. You wouldn't take the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1907 and take that piece of legislation and then say, you know what? I think the Sherman Antitrust Act means that gay marriage is now legal. Because the document evolves. Okay, that's not how documents work. The whole point of writing something down in a document, the whole point of legislation is that it is a piece of law promulgated at a particular time with a particular meaning in a particular place. And if you want to change that meaning, then you can always pass another piece of legislation. You can have a constitutional amendment, for example. This is why the Constitution has so many amendments, because it needed to be changed in many ways. And the fact is that the Constitution of the United States does not explicitly prohibit, for example, women from voting. But the Supreme Court didn't just go back and reinterpret the Constitution and say, the Constitution now means women can vote. There's a constitutional amendment that had to be passed in order so that women could vote. because that's how legislation works. The way legislation works is that it is the legislature that should be doing the legislating. It is the job of judges to look at the text, see what it means, not what they wish it meant, not what they hope it meant, not what they would like it to mean, but what it actually meant at the time that it was written, and then they implement that text. And again, if you want to change that text, well, that's why you have a legislature. That's why you have an elected branch of government. The left doesn't believe in this. The left believes that reading a text as it is meant to be read is instead an exercise in conservatism. It's an exercise in judicial activism to read the Constitution as it was written. Now, if that sounds backwards to you, it's because it is. It's stupid. It's the idea there should be an oligarchy that rules us from above and gets to determine what everything means in their own heads. So the latest example of that, I mean, the Obergefell decision that Kennedy decided is a great case of this, where Kennedy looked at the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which was about preventing discrimination against black people, and said the 14th Amendment to the Constitution mandates that a man can marry a man all across the country. Now, maybe you believe that a man should be able to marry a man. That's your prerogative. Vote for a legislature that says it's fine. That's fine. But to the idea that a judge is going to determine that from a document that was written in 1789, right, and a Bill of Rights that was promulgated in 1791, and you're going to take that document and reinterpret it to mean whatever you think it ought to mean, that is a fundamental breach of judicial duty. And that's why when we look at the judges, what we should be looking at is who is going to implement the Constitution as written. That's their job. What conservatives want is for the judiciary, the Supreme Court, to bring back its focus to what it was supposed to do, for the Supreme Court to be just as constrained as it originally was. What the left wants the Supreme Court to do is implement leftist values. Okay, so how does this play out? Well, let's talk about some of the potential nominees that President Trump is considering. So according to Fred Barnes over at the Weekly Standard, the White House has now narrowed down its list of potential Supreme Court nominees to a top 5. Brett Kavanaugh, who's 53 on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, Amul Thapar, who is 49 on the 6th Circuit, Amy Barrett, who's 46 on the 7th Circuit, Thomas Hardiman, 52 on the 3rd Circuit, and Raymond Kethledge, 51 on the 6th Circuit. So all these folks are relatively young. You figure that all of them will spend probably 30 years on the court, barring serious health problems. This is why the idea that Trump gets to shape the court for a full generation here is exactly right. Now, all of that assumes, of course, that Chief Justice Roberts isn't going to become a Kennedy-like swing vote, which I think is a dubious assumption, but it's possible that you may actually have a conservative majority on the Supreme Court for the first time in legitimately generations. So here is what we know about the people who are being discussed. Brett Kavanaugh is apparently the front runner. He is also the person who is the most icy. Okay, so I do not think the president should select Brett Kavanaugh of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. He's a former clerk for Justice Kennedy. He was elevated to the federal bench in 2006 after a 3-year delay. The reason his nomination was delayed was because Democrats were upset over the fact that Kavanaugh used to work for Ken Starr in the office of the Solicitor General, and he had the temerity to say that the Clinton administration targeted Ken Starr. So Kavanaugh has been on the court for quite a while. He has a long record. He's authored about 300 decisions. He recently dissented when the circuit decided that a 17-year-old illegal immigrant detainee had a right to an abortion. He said that the decision was, quote, based on a constitutional principle as novel as it is wrong. He held in 2011 that the Washington, D.C. ban on semi-automatic rifles and its gun registration requirement were unconstitutional under the Supreme Court's Heller decision, which recognized that the Second Amendment to the Constitution was an individual right. All of these are good decisions. He also held that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau structure was unconstitutional, which of course is true as well, and holds administrative decision-making to a minimum. Okay, Kavanaugh, here's where it starts to get a little bit dicey. Kavanaugh, like Chief Justice Roberts, is known for working across the aisle. He is, on the downside, apparently, a general believer in Chevron deference. Chevron deference is the idea that you have these administrative courts, these administrative law courts, that get to decide your fate, and you can't appeal that directly to the judiciary. So administrative law courts exist in the executive branch. There's a whole branch of thought that says Chevron deference is stupid, that if something is decided by, for example, the EPA, that is reviewable by a judge because the EPA is not a judicial system. The EPA is a regulatory system. Kavanaugh reportedly does not use textualist methods nearly as much as conservatives might wish, and worst, he upheld Obamacare in Sissel versus Department of Health and Human Services, as well as Seven Sky versus Holder, in which he may have actually crafted the rationale that Chief Justice Roberts eventually used in calling the Obamacare penalties a tax. Remember that Chief Justice Roberts rewrote Obamacare to make it constitutional, suggesting that it was a tax rather than a penalty. And it appears that Kavanaugh may have actually created that rationale. So I'm not saying that Kavanaugh would certainly be another Chief Justice Roberts, but I think it's more likely he would be another Roberts than another Gorsuch. Okay, now, Amul Thapar He's relatively new to the appellate courts. He voted to uphold Ohio's method of lethal injection, and a Michigan government's meetings opening with a Christian prayer. He said that's legal as well. He's ruled that monetary donations are a form of protected speech under the First Amendment. Now, because Thapar's record is relatively thin on the Court of Appeals, he's only appointed in the last year and a half, there's not much to go on with regard to issues like abortion and religious freedom. With that said, Professor Brian Fitzpatrick of Vanderbilt Law School described Thapar as very Scalia-like and very Thomas-like, and Thapar has criticized Richard Posner's pragmatism. Posner is on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals and is a terrible judge. He criticized Posner's pragmatism in judicial theory because using pragmatism rather than text would, quote, elevate judges to the position of co-legislator, which is exactly right. Judges should not be legislating. They should be interpreting the law as it is written. He is a textualist who has praised Scalia himself. So if I have to choose between Thapar and Kavanaugh, I choose Thapar. The best of the bunch, it seems to me, is Amy Barrett. So Amy Barrett is on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. She was a cause célèbre, you recall, when Democrats began suggesting that her Catholicism was a bar to her ability to be an objective judge. And she was supposedly so Catholic that she was going to use her Catholicism to rule in particular cases. She says that life begins at conception. She signed a letter from the Beckett Fund criticizing Obamacare's requirement that employers provide contraceptive coverage, calling it a, quote, grave violation of religious freedom. Barrett has written in depth on Justice Scalia's originalism. She's evidenced support for textualism as well. She clerked for Scalia. So Amy Barrett would just be first rate. She's the youngest of the bunch. She's a woman, and it would drive Democrats up a wall because she's Catholic as well. So I think Amy Barrett is my number one choice. Now, in just a second, I want to get to the last two possibilities for the Supreme Court, according to Fred Barnes. These are the top five that we are going through right here. First, I want to talk a little bit about Dollar Shave Club. So let's talk about the fact that you look like a schlub. Okay, the reason you look like a schlub is because every time you go to the drugstore, you forget to pick up a razor or you forget to pick up the right soap. And then you run out of it. You're in the shower, you look around, there's no soap, or you're about to shave and you realize that your razor blades are all blunt. Well, you don't have to do that, okay? Dollar Shave Club makes sure you have everything you need to get ready in the bathroom. Any particular product that you want, they've got. Right? Dollar Shave Club delivers everything you need. They've got shampoo, conditioner, body wash, toothpaste, hair gel, even a wipe that leaves your butt feeling tingly clean. I am a particular fan of their amber and lavender calming body cleanser. It really is phenomenal. It is delightful. It smells just wonderful, and it is calming indeed. I mean, you may get the impression from me that I am high energy and a giant stress ball of a human being. Well, let me tell you, once I start using that calming body cleanser, I mean, it's zen in there. All of Dollar Shave Club's products are made with top-shelf ingredients that won't break your budget, and you will feel the difference. So the best way to get started is for $5, you can get their Daily Essentials Starter Set. It comes with body cleanser, one-wipe Charlies, those are the amazing butt wipes, their world-famous shave butter, and their best razor, the 6-blade Executive. Keep the blades coming for a few bucks more a month. Add in shampoo, toothpaste, anything else you need for the bathroom. Check it all out at dollarshaveclub.com/Ben. That's dollarshaveclub.com/Ben. Use that /Ben so that they know that we sent you in to get that special deal. Okay, so we have been going through the 5 judges that President Trump is looking at for the Supreme Court, according to Fred Barnes. I'm hearing the same thing from the folks that I know in the White House, that these are the judges who are being considered. So we've already gone through Brett Kavanaugh, of whom I'm deeply skeptical. Amul Thapar, who sounds good, but his record's a little bit thin. Amy Barrett, who is who I think is a deep textualist, a deep originalist, and would be a very, very solid pick. Now we get to Thomas Hardiman. So Thomas Hardiman, you recall, was one of the last two. It was down to Hardiman and Gorsuch for the last seat. I opposed Hardiman. I supported Gorsuch. Good for me. Okay, that was right. Okay, Gorsuch has turned out to be a tremendous justice. I'm very skeptical of Thomas Hardiman. Leonard Leo, who's one of Trump's chief advisors, has described Hardiman as very much in the mold of Justice Scalia, well-schooled on the doctrines of originalism and textualism, but Hardiman has never spoken openly about originalism and textualism. I've never heard his judicial philosophy. So I need to hear his judicial philosophy. Now, in some cases, he's done great. He stood against a New Jersey law that required showing a justifiable need to allow carrying a handgun publicly. He said that violated the Second Amendment. In another Second Amendment case, he specifically stated that the threshold question in a Second Amendment challenge is one of scope, adding that the inquiry, quote, reflects an inquiry into text and history. So that sounds originalist, but it's still a little bit thin. He also, here's where we get dicey. He also ruled that a plaintiff could sue for sex discrimination on the grounds that he was a male treated badly for being effeminate, thus broadening the class of claims under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So Title VII of the Civil Rights Act says you can't discriminate against someone on the basis of sex. He broadened that to include you can't discriminate against someone on the basis of their perceived effeminacy, which is not the same thing at all. Right? The whole point of Title VII is that men can't discriminate against women in employment. That was the point of Title VII. It's not that you can't discriminate. It may be bad, but Title VII doesn't say anything about you made fun of a guy's shirt because you thought that it was pink or something. There's nothing in Title VII about that. He also has ruled to strike down a fire department's residency requirements, which he termed racially motivated. In that particular case, he equated disparity with discrimination by statistical modeling, stating, quote, minority workforce representation that low suggests discrimination. That kind of logic is not textualist or originalist. If you look at disparity and you immediately jump to it must be discrimination, then I've got a problem with your legal reasoning. He also ruled in favor of an illegal immigrant seeking asylum on the grounds that he was targeted by MS-13. There was an illegal immigrant who said that he wanted asylum in the United States, and he was refused asylum. He said he was being targeted by MS-13 in Honduras, and he was refused asylum because they said, well, the government's supposed to protect you down there. Anybody targeted by MS-13 doesn't just get to claim asylum in the United States. And Hardiman overruled that. He said that this guy got to claim asylum. Hardiman is also good friends with President Trump's sister, who sits on the I believe the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and they are good friends. I'm skeptical of Hardiman. I don't think that Hardiman would be a strong pick. So that two out of the four, I think, would be great picks. 2 would not be particularly strong. Then we get to Raymond Kethledge. So Raymond Kethledge, like Kavanaugh, is a former Kennedy clerk. Unlike Kavanaugh, he's actually expressed his judicial philosophy. So in his original confirmation testimony, he said, I would make sure that the values I would be enforcing if I were a judge are not just my values, that I'm not striking something down simply because I don't like it, that as a counter-majoritarian aspect of our system of government, I would start with the text. He also said before the Federalist Society that, quote, the court tries to find the best objective interpretation of the statute based on the statutory text, and he said the job of the court was to determine what is the meaning that the citizens bound by the law would have ascribed to it at the time it was approved. Okay, that's sort of definitional originalism. We don't have a lot in terms of his particular decision making. We do know that in 2016, Kethledge slammed the IRS for failing to turn over materials necessary for determining whether they discriminated against conservative groups. As far as abortion, we don't have much on Kethledge. Kethledge was the Judiciary Committee counsel for Spencer Abraham when he was a senator, when Abraham was pushing for a federal abortion ban. So here's the bottom line. The most outspokenly textualist judges on this list are Barrett and Thapar, Barrett by a long shot. Kavanaugh has the most red flags. Hardiman has red flags too. We don't know enough about Kethledge at this point from his rulings, but his talk of judicial philosophy is promising. Here is the problem. Since Judge Bork was nominated in the 1980s, and Ted Kennedy, the worst of all Kennedys, came forward and started bashing the hell out of Judge Bork and coined the term Borking him, right? He just went after him and destroyed him on the public stage. Since then, there's been a tendency by Republican presidents to nominate people who are stealth candidates, to nominate people who do not have a long historic record of originalism and textualism. And you're not even allowed to ask people tough questions. You're not allowed to ask them whether you think that Roe was wrongly decided. Right? You see this in judicial hearings all the time, in Supreme Court judicial hearings. Somebody will say, well, was Roe wrongly decided? And the left uses it as a litmus test. If you say Roe was wrongly decided, they won't vote for you. Well, the right should have a litmus test too. Of course, Roe versus Wade was wrongly decided. It's a garbage case. It is one of the worst reasoned cases in the history of the United States, and it inculcates a moral standard that is simply not based in the Constitution. There's nothing in the Constitution that grants a right to kill your baby in the womb. The founders would have been appalled at such a notion. Literally nothing is there. They said there's an emanation from a penumbra that ends up, what does that even mean? Basically what that means is there are a bunch of justices on the Supreme Court who decided they felt like legalizing abortion that day, so they went ahead and they legalized abortion that day. Okay, it seems to me that you should be able to ask judicial nominees who are going to be sitting on the court for the next 30 years what they think of critical cases, that they should be able to give honest answers to those critical cases. But because Democrats have made it such a cause celeb to destroy people over their positions on controversial cases, the easiest way of getting on the court is to be a stealth candidate who's never said anything controversial, and then we never have to ask you about the things you've said that are controversial. Here's my recommendation. There are 51 United States senators who are Republicans. That means that and thanks to Harry Reid, which I'll explain in a moment, President Trump does not need 60 votes to get anyone through the Senate. So let's ask every question we've got to ask. Let's vet these candidates all the way down to the ground. We cannot afford to blow this. If we get another Justice Souter, if we get another Sandra Day O'Connor, if we get another Anthony Kennedy, if we get another John Paul Stevens, this will have been a massively blown opportunity. A massively blown opportunity. A historically blown opportunity that will not come around again because there's this sort of ghoulish death watch that happens on the Supreme Court where we sit around waiting for somebody of the other party to die. But the Supreme Court needs to be hemmed back into its constitutional role. And its constitutional role is not to implement stuff that I like or stuff that you like. Its constitutional role is to read the Constitution and apply the words of the Constitution clearly. This is why, for example, if I were going to go off the board here, but still on President Trump's list, I would be going for Senator Mike Lee. I think Senator Mike Lee would be the best pick of anybody that's been brought up. We know where he stands politically. We know where he stands constitutionally. I know where he stands constitutionally because I've discussed the Constitution with Senator Lee. Senator Lee is a deep textualist, a deep originalist, and you know that he would vote to constrain the federal government's powers when it violates the Constitution of the United States. And he would also not use his own political preferences as the guidepost for determining what the law allows. So I like the idea of Senator Mike Lee. I know people are saying, well, then you won't have that vote in the Senate. Are you kidding? Utah? Yeah, right. Utah's going to appoint a Democrat senator to fill Mike Lee's spot. No chance. Okay, so if you want to guarantee that this is a pick that goes through and a pick that votes the way that justices should all be voting, then it should be Mike Lee. Mike Lee would be the best pick. Of the people on the list, Amy Barrett would be the best pick as far as I am concerned. Now, in just a second, we're going to talk about the wailing and gnashing of teeth from the left, because I have this right here, this leftist tears tumbler, and it has been refilling nonstop. This is the first time in 24 hours that it's not spilling over onto the desk. I've literally just left it here, and it's just overflowed. And we had to have a plumber come in and everything, and they couldn't stop it. The magical leftist tears were just flowing into it. I had to drink them hot. There was no time to let them cool. That's how amazing it was. So, if you want to hear all of that, all you have to do is go over to dailywire.com right now and subscribe. $9.99 a month gets you a subscription to dailywire.com. That means you get the rest of this show live, the execrable Michael Knowles show live, Andrew Klavan's show live. And it also means that you get to ask us questions in the mailbag. I have a mailbag tomorrow. It'll be awesome. You want to ask those questions? Make sure you go over there. And with the annual subscription for $99 a year, you get this leftist tears hot or cold tumbler. And as I say, sometimes the tears are so salty and so rich and so sweet at the same time. You could experience that yourself if you just spent the $99 to get the annual subscription. Also, please check us out over at YouTube and iTunes. Please subscribe and leave us a review. We have a Sunday special coming up that's going to be great this week. We have Adam Carolla stopping by on Sunday, and it's a lot of fun. So check that out as well. We are the largest, fastest growing conservative podcast in the nation.